Okay, hi, this is Katie Mercier from CJJ. Welcome to the Civil Citations, Juvenile Justice, and the Impact on DMC webinar. I just have a few technical things before I hand it over to our speakers today. First of all, you'll notice that you're all muted right now. So if anyone has any questions, you can either press the raise your hand function or put them in the questions box, and I'll have the presenters answer them at the end. I would say if you are on a cell phone while doing this webinar, I would strongly suggest you type your questions into the question box to avoid any kind of audio feedback. And with that, I will turn it over to Marie Williams to introduce our speakers.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. As Katie mentioned, I'm Marie Williams, Interim Executive Director of the Coalition for Juvenile Justice. And I'd like to welcome everyone to CJJ's webinar on civil citations, juvenile justice, and the impact on DMC. So as you all probably know, civil citations are a current and exciting topic in juvenile justice, and one that's been generating significant conversation and sometimes even controversy in the field. So we're pleased to have with us today representatives from the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice to talk about their civil citation initiative, which we've come to learn is yielding early positive results, both from the standpoint of reducing reliance on incarceration and impacting disproportionate minority contact. So today we have with us presenters Joshua Cook and Theda Roberts. A little background on Joshua and Theda. Joshua Cook serves as program analyst for the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice's Office of Prevention and Victim Services. He's responsible for monitoring and evaluating current prevention initiatives and works closely with the Bureau of Research and Planning to determine the effectiveness of prevention programs statewide. He also analyzes DMC trends and prepares the Relative Rate Index, RRI tables, for federal funding applications. Joshua started working for DJJ in 2012, and prior to that served as a research assistant for the Commission on Capital Cases, where he tracked and analyzed the appellate processes of inmates on Florida's death row. Joshua received his bachelor's and master's degrees in criminology at the Florida State University, and he's currently in the final stage of his PhD. His dissertation explores the causes of variation in application of civil citation in the state of Florida, so he's in the right position at the right time. And a little bit about Theda. Theda Roberts serves as the Civil Citation Coordinator for the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice, where she works to encourage and assist communities statewide to implement or improve civil citation at the local level. Prior to moving into this position, Ms. Roberts worked on special projects for Secretary Wansley Walters at DJJ headquarters. She came to DJJ in 2011 from the Governor's Office of Policy and Budget, where she analyzed DJJ's operations. She also spent 8 years working in state and local government for the Florida House of Representatives and the Brevard County Commission. Ms. Roberts studied at Brevard County Community College and the University of Central Florida, and she and her husband Mike have 2 grown sons and a grandson. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joshua and Theda to lead us in our webinar presentation.
Thank you very much, Marie. This is Theda Roberts. I am the statewide Civil Citation Coordinator for the Department of Juvenile Justice here in Florida, and we are embarked on a wonderful journey that will reform the way we do juvenile justice in Florida. Let me talk just a bit about civil citation, what it is on that next slide, please. Civil citation, next slide, please. Thanks. A civil citation is simply an alternative to arrest that provides swift and appropriate sanctions for minor misdemeanor acts and does that in ways that increase public safety, improve youth outcomes, and save taxpayer money. Next slide, please. Thank you. You know, when I was working in the governor's office, I realized, as many of us in the field did, that we were, that the research was coming out that showed that for certain youth with low-risk youth who had more intensive therapies, that we were seeing an increase in recidivism. So back in 2011, when our Governor Scott came on board, he brought Wansley Walters in to shepherd us into this reform measure. Wansley Walters is our secretary. She comes to us from Miami-Dade area where she reformed juvenile justice. And one of the components of that was the civil citation. So one of the very first policy initiatives of the governor in 2011 when he came on board was to revise the civil citation laws. This law had been on the books, I think, since about the mid-90s, and we made some changes at that time. So basically, civil citation is important in a number of ways. It allows DJCA to identify youth who are more likely to come into the system and wrap services around those youth so that we hope we never see them again. It helps safeguard the youth's future because there's no arrest record when a youth successfully completes civil citation. There's no record that can follow them when they try to enter the military, educational facilities, employment opportunities. So their future is safeguarded, and if they successfully complete and stay out of trouble, they can truthfully say that they've never been arrested. When consistently applied across the county, across the state, civil citation provides equal justice for every youth. And very important, these youth pose no real threat to public safety, and civil citation keeps them out of our system. Next slide, please. This is the statute as revised in 2011. It did make some significant changes. Prior to 2011, civil citation was an option for law enforcement when they were faced with arresting or citing a youth, and it was available in certain counties and certainly not statewide. And in 2011, that change was made to require that civil citation be an opportunity in every community while still maintaining law enforcement discretion when they came in contact with that youth who was eligible for civil citation, either to cite or to arrest. This law calls for the concurrence of the statutory stakeholders, the chief circuit judge, state attorney, public defender, and the head of every law enforcement agency, so that they determine in each community what civil citation will look like there. And the statute defines who may operate the civil citation. It could be that local law enforcement, local government, whoever local government wants to operate this system, and it could be the Department of Juvenile Justice as well. Go ahead and next slide, please. Thank you. Another thing that was changed in 2011 is that the eligibility was limited to those first-time, non-serious misdemeanors. And prior to that, there had been opportunities for a second time, perhaps, but at this time, in our statutes, it's available only to those first-time, non-serious misdemeanors. And it requires youth to admit guilt. It allows them to refuse participation and go through the normal juvenile justice process. And it specifies that a youth assessment must be completed and intervention services received. And this is a very important part of the civil citation because it allows us to determine what's going on in that youth's life at that very early stage of delinquency and wrap services around them so that we can address those issues and get them behind, and the kid can go forward, not to get into trouble, and toward a successful life. And the law also provides that civil citation is not considered an arrest. It's not a referral to the department. Next slide, please. Thank you. Also, very key to this statute is that every youth who does not successfully complete those original charges go back to the state attorney's office for processing. So there is a built-in mechanism so that youth who are on who accept the civil citation process but do not complete the sanctions, that arrest goes forward as it would have in the first place. The law also authorizes us, the Department of Juvenile Justice, to develop guidelines and help to implement or improve, assist programs as they get theirs up and operating, or improve those programs that are already up and operating around the state. And another very key piece of this legislation was that it provides that the civil citation use data would be provided to DJJ, that we would maintain it, analyze it, and that is a very key piece because it allows us to determine what is working and build our processes around what's working. And the final thing that bill did was provide that a similar diversion program that's already up and operating in the community may serve as the civil citation component. And that's very important as we go around to communities and try to implement the civil citation process, is that we don't want to build a process where there's already a process there. It may be a teen court, it may be a juvenile first offender program, a program that's up and operating successfully in the community. We just want to tweak it in the ways that it serves the certain component of use the civil citation is so that they get the assessment and so that we get that data. So similar diversion programs are very much a part of this civil citation process. May I have the next slide? Thank you. And this is a look at the statutory responsibilities. That statutory stakeholder groups, judge, state attorney, public defender, and the law enforcement, those are the folks who get together, concur, decide what civil citation is going to look like in their community, decide what operating entity or managing entity, if you will, is going to be the one that processes those use. Law enforcement's responsibility is to cite use, to assign the service hours, and then to notify DJJ that that use has received that civil citation. The operating entity is responsible for the assessment, for assigning the interventions, and reporting the outcomes back to the department. Part of the civil citation process is up to 50 hours of community service hours. So the service hour monitor is responsible for reporting those hours, of course. The child is responsible for admitting that he or she did that offense, reporting to that operating entity within 7 days, and are refusing to participate in going through the regular process. And our responsibility as the State Department of Juvenile Justice is to assist and analyze, to report those outcomes, and to operate civil citation as needed, and especially in rural communities that have a lack of resources. DJJ will step in and we'll do that assessment piece, and then when we need to, we'll do the case management piece as well. Next slide, please.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and take over and talk about a little bit about the data, and let you know that since the revised civil citation statute in 2011, we've really seen some tremendous progress throughout the state, and some really encouraging successes in the use of civil citation. And what you see here on the screen right now is the last 3 years, the civil citations and first-time misdemeanor arrests in the state of Florida. And what you'll notice is that over the years, we've seen the arrests come down and the civil citations increase. And what that suggests to us is that we're increasing the utilization rate for civil citations. So those youth that would have gotten arrested are now being civilly cited. So we're seeing progress in this respect. And that far right bar chart for fiscal year 2012-2013, that represents about a 30% utilization rate. Now this is encouraging because it's up from 2010-11, but we're going to be a little more ambitious than that, and we're working towards at least a 60% utilization rate for the state of Florida as we move forward. Next slide, please. Okay, as I also mentioned, we've also seen tremendous progress in rolling out civil citation statewide and increasing the number of counties that are actually utilizing civil citation as an alternative to arrest. So you can see there the year in which the statute was revised, we only had a handful of counties that were actually operating a civil citation program. Now, if you look at fiscal year 2012, 2013, you'll see that 51 of 67 counties have an active civil citation program. Now that's a huge success. I mean, we're looking at the vast majority of counties across the state operating a civil citation program. Then when you combine that with the green counties that you see there, the ones that are in the process of implementing civil citation program, you'll see that we're well on our way to statewide application and implementation of civil citation. And also, something interesting that I'd like to note, Marie, I know that you asked me a couple of days ago if there was any correlation between those counties that are not operating civil citation and those counties that might have high rates of disproportionate minority contact. And I actually went back after we talked and looked at those counties that weren't operating civil citation and matched them on their levels on the relative rate index. And there was really no apparent correlation. It was kind of a mixed bag, which indicates to me that either the counties with a high relative rate index aren't necessarily the same counties that are not embracing civil citation. So they might not, we still need a closer look, but it doesn't suggest to me that there's a racial implication there from that standpoint.
Great, thank you.
Just one last note on this slide here. This statewide rollout, this success in pushing this out statewide has really come at great effort to the department. I know CETA and the rest of our folks in the field have been pushing really hard, going out into communities, really pushing the benefits of civil citation. So this is, like I've already mentioned, this is a great success for the department, really. Next slide, please. I think this is one of the most important slides you're going to see today, and this is showing you the recidivism rates for the various services that we have in our continuum at DJJ. And what you'll see is that civil citation represents the best rate of success among the continuum of services that we have to offer. I mean, when you compare it to, say, prevention, which we also usually see a pretty good success rate with our prevention programs, it's even better than some of our prevention programs. And obviously, when you compare it to something punitive like residential, you see a much better success rate. 7% indicates that on the inverse, 93% of our youth are succeeding. So that's a really positive sign. All right, next slide, please. Now, what this graph is showing, what this chart here is showing you is a very similar relationship to what we saw in the last one. The only difference is the last one was talking about all of the youth in our system. This is confined solely to first-time misdemeanor youth. And what you're seeing here is you're seeing a bunch of bubbles on the screen, and really the only thing that the bubbles represent is how many youth are being served by that particular service. The real takeaway point here, I think, or at least one of them, is that civil citation offers far better success than similar diversion programs. So you're looking at, about half of the reoffense rate of similar diversion programs. And then when you compare that up there to the far top left corner of probation, obviously a much more punitive sanction, we've got far better results. Additionally, when you compare civil citation to no sanctions, we've even got better success rates than those youth who aren't sanctioned at all. One of the big concerns that we have, especially when dealing with low-risk youth like those who would be eligible for civil citation, is that the research shows us that low-risk youth who are sanctioned have far worse outcomes than, say, high-risk youth who are sanctioned. So the concern is always that when you put a kid through any kind of sanctioning process who's at low risk to reoffend, you don't want to see any, you don't want to create recidivism where there might not have already been. And what we're seeing is that civil citation even comes in at a lower reoffense rate than no sanction at all. So that's also very positive. All right, next slide, please.
Let me talk a little bit about how we've tried to implement this program across our state, the Civil Citation Initiative. One of the things we also did in 2011 was to, another reform initiative was to reduce the number of misdemeanors that are going into the residential facilities, the 24-hour secure facilities. And the legislature reinvested a portion of those cost savings because of that. Of course, residential is very expensive. So we are going to serve those kids instead in the community. So they reinvested a portion of those cost savings to serve kids as they come into our system, as well as those kids that would have been destined for residential. And civil citation youth who assessed as having a need for mental health a need for substance abuse, more deep-end type of services, that funding is available for those youth. With the department also dedicated a position to serve as a civil citation coordinator. And that's what I do. I travel the state, talking to stakeholder groups, talking to anybody who will listen to get civil citation up and operating. We are also collaborating with several groups. Our initial collaboration was with the Everett Family Foundation, who wanted to help us as we move forward, and they are working with us in 3 counties to get civil citation up and operating within the current processes that are already there. We've completed in Escambia County, where they started with a school-based program and expanded that to county-wide, which is our goal for every county as we move forward. We are also working with the University of, I better get this right since I'm in Tallahassee, Florida State University, to work on looking at civil citation, the effectiveness. They've got a 3-year program, and one of the issues they're going to be looking at is how effective civil citation is. We're also working with Florida Tax Watch, where they're looking at civil citation as well as some of our other diversion programs to get that up and to look at how all of them are working together, cost effectiveness as well as use effectiveness. We've lost our screen, so give us just a second. Oh, cool, it's back. And can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. We've worked very actively to get out in front of different organizations, including the Sheriff's Association, the Chief of Police, even working with regional merchants who work with retail theft to try to get them to realize that civil citation is a much better alternative than arrest for those youth who are shoplifting. And shoplifting is one of the top 3 things that kids get in trouble for, civil citation eligible youth. So we are working in all these different areas. We've been to the state of North Carolina to talk in front of their committee about civil citation, and just trying to get this word out as much as we can so that people understand what civil citation is. It's not a slap on the wrist. There are sanctions involved. But more than that, it is effective, and these kids have a better chance of success if they get that civil citation than if they are arrested. And the next screen, please. A very important thing, which our agency should be very proud, is the way that we have created a dashboard for civil citation information. And you can go onto our civil citation dashboard and see the utilization rate by circuit, by state, by circuit, by county. You can also look at that, filter it by race, by gender. You can look at the dispositions for those youth that were eligible but arrested. You can also look at the offense rates and the offense program rates. And some of the charts you've seen today are taken right out of our dashboard. It's open to, it's a public access. Anybody can get in there and take a look at what we're doing in the state of Florida. And we are, of course, using that data to monitor utilization by county and look for race and gender for similar offenses to see how we're moving in that direction. Next slide, please. Another thing we're doing is educating stakeholders across the state, to those groups that were up there a little while ago, as well as to local law enforcement agencies, local juvenile justice boards, and not only my position as a coordinator, but we've incorporated that state program-wide, so that as our department goes out and talks about the reforms that we're doing, the civil citation is a part of that. And another very important thing that we've done is we have developed an assessment for those youth who come into our system without an arrest, because of course they have no priors. And this assessment is designed to specifically address their risk factors and help us determine how best to serve them. And we are just now getting ready to implement that assessment. May I have the next screen, please? I want to talk a little bit about the process. When a law enforcement officer is on the street or in school and encounters a youth that they could arrest, who's eligible for civil citation, this is the the process that they would use to cite the youth. They could either transport that youth to a juvenile assessment center and simply confirm identity, fill out the forms, leave the youth there, and have no more intervention in that youth processing other than being notified how the youth's progress is as it goes along. And then that JAC, the Juvenile Assessment Center, does the case management and follows that youth through completion, successful or unsuccessful. And the next slide shows the second option, and that's, of course, the officer does a field citation or school citation. So he has the youth in front of him, he confirms that identity, he fills out all the paperwork, he gets the parents in front of him, and then gets them paperwork and sends them to the home with that child, and that child has 7 days to contact the civil citation operating entity, who then does all the casework. And our point is that in many ways it is easier to cite a youth and drop them off at our juvenile assessment centers than it is to do that field citation. But the field citations are used a lot here in Florida as well. May I have the next screen? And this is just a flow chart of how it works in Florida. There's the first-time offender. The law enforcement officer cites the youth. Those arrest warrants are held to see what's going to happen with that youth. That assessment is completed, and those referrals are made for services. Those services may be taken care of by the teen court. They may do that overseeing. It could be that JAC. It could be the first offender programs that we've talked about. Those service hours and other sanctions that youth is assigned are completed. Any intervention services, family counseling, whatever that is indicated by that assessment when the youth completes that, then they're successful. No criminal records. They're gone. And if they're unsuccessful, that original arrest form is pulled out, given to the state attorney, and that arrest is processed. Let me talk just a tiny bit about our process for the data that we have, the data that we maintain on these youth. And Josh is going to talk about it a little bit as well. We maintain that data in a very safe part of our juvenile justice information system, and we do not share that data with anyone outside of our agency unless there is a definite need to know. We certainly do not share it with, in fact, the only people, let me put it this way, the only people we do share it with are the people who are operating civil citations, and they only have the access for their particular youth that they're in charge of. We do not share with law enforcement. We don't share it with the military either. Next slide, please. This is a look at the case management. After that youth contacts the civil citation operating entity and they set up an appointment, they are in front of that within 2 weeks. They're in front of those people, getting their assessment, getting their sanctions started, and moving on through that process. Those sanctions are signed, and that organization works as closely with that youth as possible because we all want that youth to succeed. We want to make sure he does the sanctions, make sure he gets where he needs to be, and that all is done properly. And then, of course, upon completion, notifying the referring law enforcement agency whether the youth has been successful or not. And if you'll go to the next slide, please. And this is a look at the typical sanctions. Community service hours are always a part of the sanctions, but it also could be a letter of apology. It could be an essay, restitution. Some communities take restitution. Some communities don't allow youth restitution to participate. We would like to move toward a system where we can encourage restitution statewide because we want every youth who's eligible to get that opportunity. The case management could include working with a mentor or having a curfew, having those school progress monitoring going on, and drug testing or family counseling, depending on what is needed as indicated by the assessment. Next slide, please. There are some benefits to civil citation. Civil citation increases public safety. That early intervention and youthful misbehavior reduces future criminality. Those kids are not getting in trouble in the future as much as they would as if they were arrested. We know that by looking at the recidivism. So anytime you have fewer arrests in the future, you are increasing the public safety for your community and for your state. It improves youth outcomes. We've seen that. Kids have a 92% success rate on average for youth in civil citation. And it also saves taxpayer money. The American Bar Association presented this information during a 2011 presentation that it costs approximately $5,000 to process a youth through the various criminal justice systems and only less than $400 to process that youth as a civil citation. So there are significant cost savings involved. Next slide, please. Next slide.
Sorry, I just want to check. Did you want benefits for law enforcement? Or
yes.
benefits?
Yes, let's start here. Thank you. Typically, one of the main benefits for law enforcement is that civil citation should be easier than arresting that youth. And it is, in many cases, it requires less time. Of course, because civil citation is different from community to community, that's not always the case. But there's always no court appearance involved, so we know that it's easier in that way. I think it's very, very important for law enforcement to know that civil citation is not a pass. Youth are held accountable for their behavior with swift and effective sanctions, and they have to fulfill those sanctions or that original arrest goes forward. It certainly decreases agency costs and allows those limited resources of law enforcement to focus on more serious crimes. May I have the next slide, please? There are also benefits for the community. It addresses bad behavior early and immediately. When you get a child who comes into civil citation, who starts acting up and they have that first encounter with law enforcement, that's the prime opportunity to determine what's going on in that kid's life and make a difference. And as parents and teachers and working with youth, we know that the sanctions that are most effective are the ones that are most immediate. So this is a very important component of the civil citation success. Also, because all the risk factors that are being addressed, both in the child's life and in the family component, that is building healthier youth, which builds healthier families, which builds healthier communities. And that will be a natural process, a result of civil citation as it moves forward. And when consistently applied across the county, civil citation provides equal justice to youth. We'd like to say that youth at one end of the county should have the same opportunity for civil citation as the youth at the other end of the county. And the kid in the community should have the same opportunity as that kid in the school. So that is definitely one of our goals, to bring civil citation available to every youth in the community. And we've been really good moving toward that as well. Next slide, please. And of course, there are so many benefits for the youth. Those risk factors are identified and gotten out of the way so that youth can progress in that youth's future with those immediate interventions and sanctions. The families are made healthier. Youth are less likely to offend. We've talked about all this as we've gone through, and that there is no success record. Every youth who successfully completes in the state of Florida gets a letter signed by the secretary congratulating them on their success and stating that as a result of this civil citation, there is no criminal history record, and that could be shared with anybody. So that is a wonderful thing for these kids. And very important, it avoids that arrest. Civil citation avoids that arrest, which so many times can lead to an escalation into our juvenile justice system. If you'll go to the next slide. This is just a slide that looks at how civil citation can halt the downward spiral. You know, for stable families, when our youth get into trouble in our families, we will surround them with support of what needs to happen. We'll make sure they get support. We'll make sure they do what they're supposed to do, and the restitution gets paid. Whatever is needed, we make sure that happens so that that youth can can move forward with his life with as little harm as possible. But when you have a youth that comes from that disadvantaged background, that youth may not have that family support to get to court, and to get to court in the right clothes, and to make sure that everything is done the way it should be. So you have that youth who's arrested when they could have got a civil citation, and they miss their court date, and then they get a failure to appear. That happens so many times. Pretty soon that youth is in secure detention. And we know that the research shows us that just stepping across the door of a secure detention facility increases the odds they're going to get into trouble. So at every step along this juncture, you're increasing odds that that kid is going to get in trouble in the future. Goes into secure probation, secure detention, gets before the judge, is put on probation again. No family supports to make sure, or little family supports to make sure the kid gets what he needs what the kid does what he needs to do. So again, violations of probation for that youth from that disadvantaged family are more apt to happen. And sooner or later, that youth is going to wind up in secure commitment. And we've seen what the recidivism rate is for these youth who wind up in secure commitment. And then, if that continues, then you have a youth who's in adult corrections. And that's what we don't want to happen. We don't want to see our kids spiraling down through the juvenile justice system so they wind up in adult corrections. Next slide, please.
All right. Well, before I bore everybody with some more data and statistics, I would like to quickly touch on something that was brought up by data, which is that regarding information management and sharing of information, Florida's Department of Juvenile Justice does maintain kind of a bifurcated information management system in which we have JJIS, the Juvenile Justice Information System, where all of our kids who are formally sanctioned, we maintain their information in that, and that is something that is accessible by, like you already mentioned, Tato, military, colleges going forward that way, and a record there can really hinder their opportunities. There's also an information system known as Prevention Web, which is where all of our prevention kids who have not received a sanction yet, their information is maintained. This is also where civil citation information is maintained, and that's not something that gets shared with those entities that might halt a youth's progress and successful functioning. We've talked a little bit about first-time, non-serious misdemeanor offenses, but what are the types of charges that we generally see when a kid comes in for civil citation? Well, the majority of the cases involve petty larceny. So this is going to be very small thefts, probably shoplifting, non-serious theft-related offenses. We've also got, the next up would be assault and battery. Now keep in mind, this is not serious assault. This is more playground dust-ups, threats, things like that, just some minor person's offenses. We also see quite a few drug-related offenses for civil citation. Just an interesting aside, some communities do not, even though they maintain an active civil citation program, do not offer civil citation to those with a drug-related offense. Now that may be because of political issues, that may be because of the fact that it's a very hot-button topic, but it is an area that's being underutilized for civil citation that we could, we could see an increase in. And then finally, disorderly conduct. Can you go to the next slide, please?
I just wanted to give you a heads up. You have about 5 minutes, and we've got a lot of really great questions, and I want to give us about 10 or 15 minutes to answer them. So.
Okay. Well, then I'm just going to run through this really quickly then. If you look here, taking what we were just looking at and then breaking it down by race, you'll see what we've already got an indication of is that for minority youth, we are utilizing civil citation more often than we are for white youth. And if you go to the next slide, you'll get to see this in a kind of a bigger picture. So statewide, like I mentioned already, we got about 30% utilization rate for civil citation among those eligible for civil citation. And when you look across the spectrum of racial and ethnic categories, you'll see that all the other categories, Black, Hispanic, Black, and then Hispanic alone, you'll see that they're being given civil citations at a rate that's equal, if not more, than white youth. Which is now, when we think about overrepresentation and sanctioning, we generally tend to jump towards negativity, that this is a bad thing. But another thing that we also see is that when we see areas that have a high relative rate index, when we see areas with high disproportionate minority contact, we generally also see underrepresentation in some of the more positive sanctions we have available, like diversion and probation. So to be able to see that we're actually offering another very positive diversion program to minority youth at an increased rate and an elevated rate when compared to white youth is very encouraging. Now, we haven't seen any real dramatic effects in the statewide relative rate index, but that's a big fixed kind of, not immovable, but it takes a lot to get that to come down. And this has only been offered very relatively recently. So this is something that we expect to see ripple effects as we move forward, and hopefully see it ultimately bring some of the relative rate index down a little bit. You go to the next slide, please. Now we were looking statewide before. This is Miami-Dade County, and this is the utilization rate that we want to see statewide. Now, Miami-Dade is obviously the poster child for civil citation. Civil citation were born out of this county. They were the ones who put this on the map, and kind of the county that we look to when we're implementing civil citation. So you're looking at it, we're going from a 30% utilization rate to well over 80%. At the same time, though, if you look at the equal opportunity story, the story is the same. There's still, minorities are still receiving civil citation at least an equivalent rate with white youth. So there's not really any racial disparity in the way we're offering civil citation, which is a very encouraging thing. The next slide, please. School arrests, school referrals, another real hot topic issue right now. I'm sure you've all heard of the school-to-prison pipeline. That's obviously something that we want to kind of knife off. We don't want to be diverted. We don't want to be taking our kids directly from schools and pumping them into the juvenile justice system. So it can be seen as a gateway to the department. And it's interesting that 51% of those who are referred from schools are first-time misdemeanors. Also, among the typical offenses, we see things like a simple assault and battery, disorderly conduct, misdemeanor, drug offenses. So taken together, this kind of paints a picture of the prototypical civil citation kid. So if we increase the use of civil citation in the schools, we could really be doing a good service here. We also have a real serious DMC issue, which is not a surprise. 47% of those arrested are minorities coming from school-related offenses, whereas they only make up about 21% of the population. So this is obviously something that like we showed before, how we're offering civil citation at least an equal, if not greater rate to minorities, we might be able to see this rate come down. That's the hope, at least. And finally, as was already mentioned, these youth don't really pose a real threat, because when you look at the outcomes of most of these kids, 65% are dismissed, not filed, or diverted. So what that suggests to me is that they were referred for whatever reason, and then once they got, for processing, they realized that this is really not as big an issue as what it was being referred for, and then they get kicked out of the system, but maintain their arrest record. And if they had gone through the civil citation program, they would have come out unscathed and with a host of services available for them. And I think the next slide is just contact information. Oh, whoops, missed one. This is just real quickly, side by side, civil citations by school versus civil citations by community. In the school, we're approaching a 50-50 split between those being offered civil citation and those being arrested. We could do better. We're shooting for 60% utilization. When you look at it in the community, we could do a lot better. We've got about a 26% utilization rate there. So what we're trying to do is provide equal access to eligible youth in the schools and in the community and bring both up in the process.
And then our final slide simply gives some contact information, and if you would like questions to discuss it more, just let us know. We have our dashboard there if you'd like to explore that as well. We're ready for questions.
Great, thank you so much. I have a lot of questions that people sent in kind of as you went, so I'm just going to read them off. The first one is from Don Liu. He wants to, or she wants to know, does the guilty plea in the civil citation process also follow the youth if they do not successfully complete sanctions and are referred to the state attorney on the original charge?
We've had that question from time to time, and we don't have any instances where it has. Could it? Yes, but it has not been a problem.
Great. Jeff McDonald asked, is a civil citations a statewide process?
It is a statewide process. We have some counties that have not yet implemented, and we're not sure ever will, although the law does state that civil citation will be in every community.
And Don had a follow-up question. How do you define recidivism, and does each county use the same definition?
Failure when it comes to civil citation is being either failing to complete the terms of the civil citation or being arrested, rearrested for another offense within a year period. We track out for a year. So any reoffenses during that year period constitute recidivism.
And we measure that, we as a state measure each county the same way.
Okay, the next question is, how do you ensure that civil citations don't widen the net so that young people arrested for a minor charge that would have been dismissed in court end up having to go through services and intervention unnecessarily?
Well, that is also a topic that comes up from time to time, and because we're only 2 years into this program, we don't have a definitive answer, but what we know is that arrests are going down while civil citations are going up, which leads us to believe that at this point we're not having a net widening. It is a topic that we address at every training because we don't want kids who don't need to be in the system in the system.
Right, and I think just to piggyback off of that, there is what we keep hearing. The concern that we keep hearing is, say a youth receives a civil citation and then does something in which the officer has discretion to just let them go with a warning, but then go in there and see that they've had a civil citation, and that's going to increase the likelihood that they're going to bring them into formal processing. Well, the police officer is not seeing that in real time, seeing that that youth has already had a civil citation. So when it comes up, if the officer still has full discretion to let a youth go with a warning without further processing.
And what we are seeing is that law enforcement officers come in contact with this youth many times before they reach the point where they realize they've got to do something. And what we want them to do is do that civil citation instead of that arrest.
Okay, a follow-up question from the same participant. Are restorative justice programs a part of the civil citation programs, and do you also connect youth with positive youth development opportunities, including mentoring, job training, et cetera?
Yes, restorative justice is a part of some of the civil citation programs because civil citation looks different from county to county. We have different programs, different a look to civil citation. One of our larger counties, Duval County, the Jacksonville area, implements civil citation under the umbrella of teen court. Some civil citation youth goes through that teen court process. But for the youth that live in that outlying areas, in the lower economic areas, they have neighborhood accountability boards established around the full-service school component where there are services actually located in conjunction to the school so the kids in that community can go to the neighborhood accountability board and get their services right there in the community. And we have that in various places in the state. Civil citation itself is can be considered a restorative justice because the youth is admitting guilt, he's making restitution, he's writing that letter of apology and restoring the wrong that's been done. Did I miss part of that question?
Sorry, what did you say?
Did I miss part of that question? There was
No,
a lot
I think
to
so.
it.
I've had several of you ask if the PowerPoint will be available, and yes, I will send out both the recording and the PowerPoint after the presentation, and the recording will be up on the website. The next question I have is from Jack Sanzalone. I'm sorry if I'm messing up all of your names. What is the average cost savings for court costs to community members for those using civil citations?
Well, we know that civil citation saves money, and we know that it saves money in every system that that youth would have touched if that youth were arrested. But we have not compiled that data on what savings have been accumulated or realized in the state attorney's office, the public defender's office, through the court system. We don't have that data.
Okay. The next question is from Craig Hargrove. Is the admission of guilt used against the juvenile if the civil citation process is not successful?
Well, we have not seen that happen in Florida. It is a question that comes up from time to time, and we're aware of it and we're tracking it, but it has not been used in Florida. For most cases, these kids are very low risk, and they would not go to trial in any case. If they're arrested, they would most likely go into a diversion program.
The next question is from Cheryl Williams. How do you monitor curfew for youth?
That would be depending upon the community, how that would happen. And I haven't asked that question in the community, but I would imagine that it could be done through calling the youth at home and making sure they were there, having parents vouch for the youth maybe. It could be, if the department, DJJ, were providing the case management, it could be an officer stopping by and checking.
And the next question is bullying acceptable for civil citation?
That would be depending upon the community. Most of our communities have implemented the Miami-Dade eligibility standard, which is all for some misdemeanors except for those that are sexually related, those that involve carrying a firearm, and those that there's gang activity involved. So that would be the discretion of the law enforcement and the state attorney as to whether or not they would accept that use for civil citation.
Sydney Savitz asks, if a youth does not have sufficient family support to show up in court, why should they be expected to follow through with a civil citation?
Well, let me think about that one for a minute. Well, we know that there is no court that they have to go to. They do have to report for community service hours. And we do whatever we can to make sure that they get there, whether it's bus tokens or even whatever that takes to get the youth there. I haven't noticed that being a problem as I've traveling the state, though. We have a pretty good high success rate.
And another question from Sydney Savitz. The civil citation requires an assessment be completed. Is this assessment uniform throughout the state, or is it subject to interpretation by the individual provider in a given circuit or county?
We do not have a uniform assessment. We as I mentioned, we're rolling out our prevention assessment tool, which we hope to get in place in every county. Now, because civil citation has been up and operating for years before the law was changed requiring every community to have one, we have communities that are well established that have their own assessment tool that they've used successfully for years, and their clinicians who interpret that. Is it done uniformly and interpreted uniformly from county to county? I very much doubt that. Again, these are low-risk youth, so the more we move toward that prevention assessment tool, where we're all using the same uniform tool, we'll get there, but we're not quite there yet.
Anna Wong asked, can you provide an example or more detail about the sanctions and interventions a child might be required to complete, and how long it takes on average for a child to complete and close the case successfully?
Typically, civil citation is a 90-day program, and it includes always that community service hour component. Depending on what each community determines the sanctions are going to be, it could be writing that letter of apology to the victim if there's a victim involved, or to the law enforcement officer, or to their parents. It could be doing an essay on whatever the assigned essay would be. It could be the curfew, school monitoring. There's a myriad of different sanctions that could be applied and are applied in different counties differently. There is on our website, on the Civil Citation webpage, we do have several documents out there that include a model guide that is basically, we've used the Miami-Dade standard as our model guide, but you'll find information there if you want to get started. You can also call me at any time. We have several PowerPoints there too, as well as one that has implementation in the title that might be of assistance.
Jason Tashia asked, how did you pick 60% for your utilization goal?
Don't know. I truthfully don't know that answer.
That decision was above our pay grade.
Yeah. All I know is I'm trying real hard to get there.
Cheryl Williams asked, if the youth is not compliant with the terms of the civil citation by not doing the sanctions imposed on them, do you refer them to the SA?
To the state attorney, yes, we do.
Larry Ashley asked, how does this program reduce DMC?
As we've talked about, we are very early in this program, and we are seeing that that of those youth that get a civil citation, when you look at it by race, that minority youth are receiving actually a greater percentage of eligible minority youth are receiving civil citation than white youth. So we know it's making a difference, but we just haven't measured it long term as yet. Anything,
right.
Josh?
Yeah, and I mean, to the extent that civil citation does improve the outcomes for at least the lower risk youth that come in on one of the first offenses, we should expect to see a reduction in DMC as we move forward. But it's going to take some time. I mean, like the chart that I showed you from 2010-11 to 12-13 and how far we've come in such a short amount of time. It's going to take a few more years out to kind of see those trickle down effects, I would imagine, and something that we're going to keep a close eye on, because obviously our metric is the relative rate index of disparity in the system, and what we monitor it every year, and we monitor it community to community, and we hope to see obviously that number come down, and you know, we can only speculate at this point as to what it's going to have ultimately, what effect it's going to ultimately have on it.
Okay, I think we have just time for one more question, and it's, are you able to break down your data by school in terms of participation and use of civil citations? If so, do you see a great difference in use of citations by school?
Yes. If you go on our civil citation dashboard, you can go into a county and choose, look at, there's a school tab, and it shows how many schools, it shows all the schools, the eligible youth served. So you can get a very good idea of which are participating and which are not. I know that we're close to the time where we don't have any more questions, but this is our how to reach us. You can call us at any time, email us, and we'll answer those questions for you.
Okay, I want to thank Joshua and Theta for doing this webinar. If we didn't get to your question, like she said, her contact information is on that last slide. So thank you so much for joining us. This recording and the PowerPoint will be posted on our website within the next 12 hours. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you.